Good morning and welcome to Newground's webinar on migration to ISO 45001-2018. My name's Jill Lomax and I will be delivering the webinar for you today. I'm the Director of the Business Services Division of Newground and I've worked as a management systems consultant for around 20 years in the fields of safety, environment and quality, having previously worked for quite some time in industry. I expect this webinar will last for up to an hour. Just before we start, there are a couple of housekeeping matters that I'll just quickly go through. During the session, please use the question and answer button to ask any questions as they arise. You'll see this here. We do have some consultants from our team who will answer as many of your questions in real time as possible. We do, however, have a lot of people listening in today, so depending on the number and/or complexity of your questions, we may send the answer out after the session has finished. If you do ask a question, your name will be visible to all attendees unless you click the Send Anonymously box, which you can see here. A link to the recording of the webinar and the slides will be emailed to you after this session, along with an anonymised copy of all the questions and answers. Just to remind a few that this webinar will be covering the key differences between 18001 and ISO 45001 to assist you with your migration to the new standard. For those of you who are familiar with or who have been involved with transitioning your company's environment, quality, food or even information management systems to the more recently revised standards, and perhaps in particular the 2015 standards, you'll find that there will be a lot of similarity with the changes that I will be going through today. So hopefully a lot of it could well be familiar to you. Okay, let's get started. So just a little bit of background to the standard to begin with. 18001 was published just short of 20 years ago to fulfill a growing demand for a certifiable standard in the absence then of an international standard. Since the late 90s, we've seen a rapid increase in the use of 18001 globally. And it was recognised that there needed to be an internationally agreed certifiable standard. Around this time, other international management system standards, such as quality and environment, were also due for review. So around 2013, the International Organisation for Standardisation approved a project committee to develop the new international standard. And following a very long 4-year development period, ISO 45001 was finally published on the 12th of March this year. In terms of your timeline for migration to ISO 45001, you do have a 3-year migration period from March 2018. And this migration period will work in exactly the same way as the transition arrangements for the 2015 quality and environment standards that you might have been familiar with or you might have already gone through in your business. So you have up to March 2021 to migrate to the new requirements. ISO 18001 will be withdrawn. And most, if not all, UCAS accredited certification bodies are now able to audit you against ISO 45001 when you are ready to do so. Just before I go into the changes in the standard, it's important to point out that many of the requirements and concepts of 18001 do still remain in the new standard. Some requirements are almost exactly the same. Some have just had slight amendment or a change in emphasis. Some have had more significant change or have quite a new focus. And there are also some entirely new requirements. In the main today, I'm going to focus on the new requirements and the more significant differences between the standards. I've split the changes down into 12 key areas for you today to try and make it a little bit easier to go through. And the first key change I want to go through for you is around the new structure and language ISO 45001 follows the new high-level structure, which is also known as Annex SL. You might also hear it referred to as HLS, which is just short for high-level structure. Either way, this is just the terminology that is used to describe how the clauses of the new standard are structured. This new structure, which is now used across all the management system standards, provides common clauses, terms, and definitions and clause text. So there's a lot of similarity now across the standards. In addition to this, within each separate standard, there are also discipline-specific content, such as hazard identification in ISO 45001, environmental aspects in 45001, or customer satisfaction in 9001. These are just examples of where each separate standard has its own discipline-specific content. But in the main, they're all following now the same high-level structure. It should be noted that the standard is still based on the Plan, Do, Check, Act model that you should all be familiar with, but it now uses risk-based thinking as the methodology for identifying risks and opportunities in all parts of the cycle to support you to improve performance and minimise any negative outcomes. So Plan, Do, Check, Act is still central to the standard. I'm just showing you quickly there the structure of the standard. You can see here, if you can just see my cursor, you can see the Plan, Do, Check, Act cycle is still central to this diagram. Through the planning, support, performance and evaluation and continual improvement. So it's still designed to follow the similar principles that were set out in 18001 as a means of driving continual improvement. In the diagram, you'll also see that I've put references on here to the clause numbers. So you can see there clause 4, clause 5 in the centre here, 6, 7 and 8, 9 and 10. Shows you now that the new high-level structure, all the main content or the requirements that you need to follow in the standard are structured between clauses 4 and 10. The dotted line in the diagram represents the scope of your management system. So this dotted line is the boundaries of what you have applied to your health and safety management system. So the operations, activities, or locations which are encompassed within your management system. You'll also see in the diagram that we've got clause 4 at the top here and at the bottom, which sits outside of this scope boundary line. There's a reason for this, which I will explain in a little more detail when we get to that part of the webinar on clause 4. Within the new structure and language, the standard also introduces some common terminology that you may not have seen before. This new terminology forms part of the new high-level structure, and it's used across all the management system standards now. And it includes new terms such as leadership, strategy, risk and opportunity, context of the organisation, and so on. I've listed a few more for you there on the slide. I will be touching on all of this new terminology in more detail throughout the webinar. The standard has also introduced some new definitions and also revised some existing definitions that were in the standard. I've listed here what I think are the most important ones to draw your attention to, and particularly the top two here around occupational health and safety risk and risk. So the previous definition of risk in 18001 has been renamed to occupational health and safety risk. And this is what you would typically understand in the safety world to be likelihood times severity. But it's important to point out that this is now termed as occupational health and safety risk and is different to a separate definition of risk, which is defined as the effect of uncertainty. So that this is more related to what you would typically think as business risk. So it's very important now when looking at the requirements of the standard to understand the difference between these two definitions. I will be looking at risk in a little bit more detail further into the webinar. The other important definition which has been introduced is for workers. A worker now means any person performing work or work-related activities that are under your control. So this extends beyond your employees to anyone working under your control, which could include temporary, casual, agency staff or contractors, for example. So when you are interpreting the requirements of the standard and it refers to workers, you must consider that this extends beyond your employees. There are quite a few other new or amended definitions, which I will cover further into the webinar. But the important thing to note here is that you should check the new terms and definitions, which are in part 3 of the standard, to ensure you have the correct understanding of them, as these are fundamental to the correct interpretation of the standard's requirements. If you don't make sure you're familiar with these new definitions, your interpretation of the requirements could be incorrect. So this new common structure and language is largely designed to support integration across or between all of the management systems disciplines that are used by your business. It's also designed to integrate your safety management system into the core functions and processes of the business, and for you to develop what could be termed to be more of a business management system as opposed to you running separate discipline-specific systems. So this new high-level structure is really trying to drive businesses to embed disciplines like safety and environment into the core functions of the business to create a more efficient business management system, as opposed to safety being managed separately to the rest of the business. The next key area I want to introduce is the new focus for the standard. The purpose of the standard is to provide a framework for you to manage, excuse me, for you to manage your safety risks and opportunities, to enable you to provide safe and healthy workplaces by preventing work-related injury and ill health, as well as by proactively improving your safety performance. This provides a different emphasis to 18,001, which was more concerned with controlling your occupational health and safety risks to improve your performance. So it could be argued that 45,001 puts a lot more emphasis on seeking continual improvement and for you to be proactive by not only addressing your risks, but by proactively looking for opportunities for improvement. The aim of the standard is to ensure that you meet the intended outcomes of your management system. Intended outcomes is a new terminology which is used quite extensively throughout the standard as the driver for what your business should intend on achieving through its safety management system. Intended outcomes is an important term for you to understand and get your head around, as it is repeatedly used throughout the standard. And by intended outcomes, the standard means things like to prevent injury and ill health to your workers, to provide a safe and healthy workplace, to ensure continual improvement in your safety performance, to ensure that you fulfill your legal and other requirements and your policy commitments, and you achieve your objectives. These things really should be the minimum outcomes for your safety management system, but you might also add in additional outcomes if they are relevant for your business. It's really up to you to decide what the intended outcomes of your management system should be. But of course, things like continual improvement, prevention of injury and ill health, fulfillment of your legal requirements should be should be a necessary outcome of your management system. The last point on the slide here is concerned again with integration. There's a significant focus now on integration throughout the standard. And there is a requirement to ensure that your safety management system is aligned and integrated with your other business processes, with your business objectives, and with the strategic direction of the organisation. This is to ensure that your safety performance is not compromised. For example, maybe meeting a delivery deadline should not compromise worker safety or health. And to ensure that safety management is embedded as a core function in the business rather than as a standalone discipline. I'm now going to take you through the new documentation requirements, which is the third significant change that I wanted to go through this morning. Documentation now comes into clause 7 of the standard, which is the support clause. Documented information is the new terminology that is used, which replaces the old phrases of control of documents and control of records. The standard uses the terms "you shall maintain documented information," which essentially means that you must document something. It also uses the term "you shall retain documented information," which means that you shall keep a record of something. So it could be slightly confusing for you. So you need to remember the words maintain documented information means keep a document, and retain documented information essentially means you need a record for it. The standard is quite clear in what you need to maintain and what you need to retain. The mandatory documented information requirements are now, though, minimal, and they are limited to things like your scope, your policy, objectives, audit programme, and your legal requirements. You therefore now have a lot of flexibility to decide what your documented system looks like. This should be driven by what your business needs rather than documenting things for the sake of it. So you should now be looking at your system to determine what is needed for your own system to be effective in a way which is proportionate to risk in your business. All references to procedures have also now been removed from the standard. There are no longer any mandatory procedures at all. The focus is now on processes, which should only be documented if your business needs them to be. This doesn't mean that you need to go and remove what you already have, but you now have the opportunity to relook at your documented system and decide for yourself what you need, as long as, of course, you have the mandatory documents in place that the standard still requires. One important factor to consider when you are looking at your documented management system is your internal audit process. A lot of internal auditors are used to following a documented procedure to assist them when they are carrying out their internal audits. So you need to think about and consider if your auditors are competent enough to audit without them, if you are, excuse me, if you are thinking about slimming down your documented system. The next key area I'm going to look at is the new leadership requirements. And this could arguably be the most challenging new requirement of the standard. These new requirements come into clause 5, which is known as leadership and worker participation. Clause 5 introduces two very significant changes to the safety management requirements. The first of these being the requirements placed on leadership of the organisation. So unlike in 18001, leadership, commitment and active support from top management are now considered to be critical for the success of the safety management system and for the system to achieve its intended outcomes. If workers see that top management takes safety performance seriously, This cascades down through the organisation and helps to establish a positive health and safety culture within the business. 18,001 had no reference at all to leadership. Top management responsibility was limited to the provision of resources and allocating roles and responsibilities and appointing a management representative, although it did make reference to top management taking ultimate responsibility for safety management. Beyond that, though, in 18,001, there was nothing else. So firstly, it's important to be clear what we mean by top management. I did touch on this definition earlier. I showed it you on an earlier slide. And it's the person or group of people who direct and control an organisation at the highest level for the business which is in the scope of the management system. So by that, I mean that if, for example, you are part of a group and it's only your part of the business that sits within the scope, it's the leadership of that business unit, not the leadership at a group level, which is considered to be the top management. It's the decision makers for the business that sits within the scope of the management system itself. So it's really important that you're clear about who the top management are, relevant to the scope of the system. So the standard now places quite extensive and prescriptive requirements on top management to demonstrate their leadership and commitment to the safety management system. It's worth considering how leadership and commitment can be demonstrated, as your auditor will look for evidence to support that these requirements are being met. And it could be things like top management being able to articulate an understanding of the key safety risks or opportunities in the business and what the business is doing about these risks and how this might link to the safety objectives or the policy commitments. It could also be things like evidence of provision of resource, such as money, technology, competent staff, maybe time, investment in infrastructure, and things like that. It could also be encouraging workers to be involved in improving safety performance and promoting open discussion about safety matters, ensuring emphasis is on improvement rather than blame, and ensuring safety is considered when they are making strategic decisions and or when the business is undergoing change. So the new top management requirements placed on leadership include that policy and objectives are aligned with the strategic direction of the business, which means they should support business strategy and not be separate or in conflict with it. As I mentioned earlier, integration is a significant new theme in the standard, and it is the responsibility of top management to ensure that the safety management system is aligned and integrated with other business processes to ensure that safety management is embedded as a core function rather than as a standalone discipline. Examples of integration could be that you incorporate safety criteria into your procurement process or product service design. You link safety objectives to business strategy, that you could consider significant safety risks in your standard business risk process, or things like including safety responsibilities within job descriptions or running integrated audit programs. These are all examples of integrating your safety management system into core functions of your business. It's also top management responsibility to promote a positive safety culture. And again, it's interesting to think about how this can be achieved and how this can be demonstrated. Top management could demonstrate this by providing clear and consistent leadership and leading by example, or promoting the formal or informal involvement in of workers in safety matters. One quite important one to think about are ensuring that rules and processes around safety are practical and proportionate to risk within the business. If workers don't understand why certain rules and processes are in place, they can become disengaged with safety. So when safety rules and processes are put in proportionate to risk, people are more likely to be engaged, and this can lead to an improved safety culture within the business. Top management must also protect workers now from reprisals when reporting incidents and hazards and risks, and this relies on the positive culture and trust of workers in the business. Top management must also implement effective processes for worker consultation and participation. Whilst consultation and participation isn't new, it is now a top management responsibility to ensure that this happens. That said, consultation and participation requirements are now significantly more extensive than they were in 18001, which brings me to the second most significant change under Clause 5, the consultation and participation of workers. The involvement of workers in the safety management system and the processes that support it is now a key requirement of effective safety management, as it enables the business to make informed decisions and improves worker engagement. The first important thing to note when we're looking at this are the definitions. So consultation is about seeking your workers' views and considering them before you make a decision. So this doesn't mean that you need to act necessarily on their views, but you must obtain them before you make a decision. Participation is about joint decision making, for example, jointly assessing risks or jointly agreeing actions. The consultation and participation requirements are now quite extensive in the standard. The business must provide the mechanisms, time, training and resources for effective consultation and participation. And it's up to you to determine the best ways of ensuring effective consultation and participation in your business, and whether you need to set up formal mechanisms such as health and safety committees. Once the mechanisms have been determined, it's important that they are given full top management support. A small organisation can include all workers in discussions and decision making, but for larger organisations, it will be much more effective to consult with one or more workers' representatives than attempt to consult with large numbers of workers directly. Other mechanisms for consultation and participation include, for example, focused team meetings or workshops or worker surveys and suggestion schemes. Whatever the mechanisms you decide to use, consultation and participation should be effective and proportionate to the specific issue or issues being considered. So you have the flexibility to decide the arrangements that are best suited to your business. The business must now also work to remove or minimise obstacles or barriers to participation. This could include things like language or literacy barriers, reprisals or threats of reprisals, or policies or practices which discourage or penalise worker participation. The standard does list what non-managerial workers should be consulted on and what they should participate in. I haven't listed them all on these slides because they are quite extensive, but it does include things like establishing your safety policy and establishing your safety objectives, determining controls for contractors, and how to fulfil your legal requirements. It is important to point out here that the reference to non-managerial workers is intended to apply to persons carrying out the work activities, and it's not intended to exclude managers who are impacted by any work activities. Some other Clause 5 amendments just to quickly note that I wanted to draw your attention to. The first is with regard to roles and responsibilities. There is now no longer a mandatory requirement to appoint a specific management representative. The mandatory responsibilities do still remain, however, that used to be assigned to the management rep, which are ensuring that the management system conforms to the requirements of the standards and reporting on the performance of the system to top management. But you can now assign these to any person or function. It doesn't have to be a specific management representative. If you want to keep your management representative, then of course you can. You just don't have to appoint one anymore. For your safety policy, there are now also some new additional mandatory commitments which must appear in your policy statement if they don't already. And your policy should be appropriate to the purpose, size and context now of your organisation, which brings me on to the next significant change. Context of the organisation. So context of the organisation is now the new clause 4 of the standard, and it's entirely new terminology which is used across all of the management systems standards now. The purpose of this new clause 4 is to ensure that the business has considered wider factors that can affect its ability to manage its safety responsibilities, or which can affect its ability to achieve the intended outcomes of the management system. So it's almost like setting the scene for what you need to consider, how that could affect your safety performance and what you need to do to manage it. In other words, it's all about putting your business into context. And that's why on the diagram that I showed you earlier, clause 4 sits outside of that boundary, because it's asking you to consider some wider influencing factors that you may need to consider in your business that could ultimately affect your safety performance. So context of the organisation is split into two main parts. The first part is that you must now determine the internal and external issues that could affect your ability to achieve the intended outcomes of your safety management system. So if you remember what I said was meant by intended outcomes, it's things like preventing work-related injury and ill health, the provision of a safe and healthy workplace, continual improvement in your safety performance, fulfillment of your legal obligations, and achievement of your objectives. So what you need to do is determine the issues that could affect your ability to achieve these outcomes. So issues can be both internal to your business or can come from external influences on your business. So examples of internal issues could be things like loss of key staff, language or diversity issues, poor culture or attitudes to safety within the business, changes within the business such as a restructure, accidents and emergencies, and competency of workers could all be internal issues that are relevant to your business. Examples of external issues could be things like changes in legislation, new technologies, new knowledge about hazards, relationships with your external providers, or key drivers in your particular industry or sector in which you work. So what you now need to do under the standard is to consider and determine the issues that are relevant to your business, which can be come from internal or external influencing factors. So how you determine these issues is entirely up to you. This will depend on the size and complexity of your business. There is no prescribed method for this. You have the flexibility to decide how you determine your issues. The other important thing to note here is that that information does not need to be documented. The second part of context of the organisation is for the business to understand the needs and expectations of its workers and its other interested parties who can affect or who could be affected by the safety management system. So you need to determine who your interested parties are for your business, what they need or expect of you from a safety point of view, and which of those needs or expectations are relevant to you. In other words, which are important for you to address or which are you obligated to address. So it's important to note that those needs or expectations which you decide are relevant to you should be managed now like a compliance obligation, as they would become the other requirements under the legal and other requirements section of the standard. And you could record these as other requirements into your legal register. So context of the organisation is intended to be done at a strategic level with top management involvement. And it could be that this information already exists within the business, and if it does, don't reinvent the wheel. Just ensure that when you're looking at issues and when you're looking at the needs and expectations of your workers and any other interested parties or stakeholders to your business, that you have considered safety matters alongside this. And the outcome of this work is that you should have established an understanding of what is important or relevant to your business, what may require further attention, and consider these when looking at risks and opportunities for the business. Which leads me on to the next most significant change, which is the assessment of risks and opportunities. So for those of you familiar with the new high-level structure, you will know that consideration of risk and opportunity is a new requirement which falls under the new Clause 6, planning. So the overall purpose of this new planning clause is for you to determine the risks that can affect your safety performance and can affect your management system, to manage these risks and to determine where you have opportunities to improve safety performance and your safety management system. So unlike other management system standards, assessment of risk was already a familiar feature of 18001. So this new high-level structure requirement for considering risks and opportunities introduced a real challenge for the expert committee that developed 45001. So in order to align with this new high-level structure, the planning section of 45001 has been split down in a slightly unusual way. It first looks at assessment of risk. So the concept of risk management has now broadened and must now consider the assessment of occupational health and safety risks from your identified hazards, which is largely the same as in 18001 and is concerned with the assessment of risk to people, i.e. the traditional risk assessment of likelihood and severity. So if you remember the definitions, the new definitions I went through earlier, this is why it's now important to recognise the difference between the definitions of occupational health and safety risk and risk. So you now need to assess the occupational health and safety risk from your identified hazards, which is the traditional risk assessment. However, you must now also assess other risks to your safety management system. So this is an entirely new requirement in the standard, and it's concerned with risks not directly related to the health and safety of people, but which could affect the safety management system itself or your safety management performance, or your ability to meet the intended outcomes of your management system. So these risks are more traditionally related to business risks, such as peaks in workflow or restructure, or poor succession planning or economic change, those types of risks. So these other risks will be largely informed from the information obtained from your context of the organisation, i.e. you will consider your priority business issues and the needs and expectations of your interested parties when you are thinking about and determining your other risks to your management system. I've put the two definitions that I put up earlier just down at the bottom of that slide, just to remind you of the differences in those definitions. It then goes on to require assessment of opportunity, which is also now broken down into two areas. So firstly, you must identify and assess occupational health and safety opportunities to enhance your safety performance. So here you need to consider opportunities to eliminate hazards and reduce occupational health and safety risks, which is what you might traditionally term to be further control measures from your risk assessment process, such as automation of high-risk activities and work rotation, those types of things. But it's also concerned with opportunities for adapting work or the work environment for workers to improve safety performance, and should be considered particularly when planning change for the business. So this could be changes to work or plant layout, or how work is organised, and facilities and infrastructure, etc. You must then also consider and assess other opportunities for improving your safety management system. So this could be things like more visible top management support for safety, such as your top management leading by example, or highlighting safety performance in strategic business plans. Or it could be things like investment in training, or improved communication on safety matters, or enhancing your incident investigation process. These are all examples of the types of things that should be considered as other opportunities for improving your safety management system. So once this is done, the business should then determine the risks and opportunities that it needs to address to give assurance that the safety management system will achieve its intended outcomes, and to support continual improvement in safety performance. So when determining and planning the risks and opportunities that you need to address, you need to consider the priority issues that you identified under Clause 4, the relevant needs and expectations of your workers and your interested parties, your hazards, your occupational health and safety risks and your other risks to your management system, your occupational health and safety opportunities and your other opportunities to your management system, and your legal and other requirements. So these are all the potential sources of risk, and the focus should be on that which is most likely to occur or which would have the most significant impact. For opportunities, the focus should be on those that can realistically be acted upon and can most improve performance. What the standard requires you to do is establish which risks and opportunities should be your priority, and it is those risks and opportunities which should be documented. Now, just at this point, I'm just going to take you into the legislation update service to show how you can actually use the system to record all of these new requirements and how these requirements link through to the risks and opportunities. So just bear with me a second while I just go into the product. So you can see here that I'm in a fictitious company called Ellie's Bakery, and I'm in Ellie's Bakery's Risk and Opportunities Register here. So I'm just going to log in. So you can see here that within LUS we have a risks and opportunities register, and this has been pre-populated with some risks and opportunities. If I go into this risks and opportunities register, this is what your risks and opportunities register could actually look like if you used it. The different colours here represent the different disciplines. So the orangey amber colour here are safety related. The green ones are environment, and the quality ones here are blue. So you can see the difference between how the system can work for you. So I'm just going to quickly show you how you can record your risks and opportunities information in the system. So if we go here, you can see that we can add a risk or opportunity. So if I click on there, you can see that I can click on risk, and I can say it's a health and safety risk, and I can put something in there like poor succession planning, which is a risk for my business. Excuse the typos. And then what I can do is add the source of that this risk. So I can say whether it's a strategic issue, or whether this has come from an interested party requirement, or whether it's come from my hazards and risk assessment process, or whether it's come from my compliance requirements, my legal register. So for me, this is a strategic business issue, which is an internal issue for my business, so I can say that that's an internal issue, and I can record my issue here as risk of our competent person leaving the business. And I can confirm and add that in. And then if I choose, I can add additional sources, so you can keep adding these sources to your risk or opportunity. I can then put a description into this, so I can say we will struggle to replace the manager if he leaves. And if I save that, you'll see that that adds into the into the legal register. You can also go into your actual safety legal register and add risks and opportunities from there. So if I just quickly take you into, we'll choose the Health and Safety at Work Act here. And for every piece of law, you have the ability here at the bottom under each summary to add in and assign a risk or opportunity from your legal register. And if I click on that, that will take you back to the risk and opportunity page, and it will pre-populate the source of that risk or opportunity being your compliance obligation and that particular piece of law. You can then also start adding in other sources here. And all of this will then create you a risk and opportunities register for you to use. So when determining and planning the risks and opportunities, you can see that you've got the priority issues, the relevant needs and expectations of your interested parties, your hazards, your risks, and your opportunities and your legal and other requirements. You can use the legislation update service to record and link all of this information together. So if you use the system properly, this is all free of charge that comes with your subscription to the legislation update service. You can really use it to bring all of these new requirements in the standard together, and it's the same within the environmental standard and the quality standard as well. So once you've done this, and once you've looked at your risks and opportunities, you then need to plan the actions that you're going to take to address your priority risks and opportunities. And one way of doing this is through the establishment of occupational health and safety objectives, which brings me on to the next key requirement that I want to look at. So the requirement to establish health and safety objectives isn't new. However, what is new is the requirement to consider your priority risks and opportunities and the results of consultation with your workers when you are deciding and establishing your objectives. Under 18,001, you just needed to consider your legal and other requirements and your occupational health and safety risks. That is, obviously, the risks from your hazards. So you've got more things to now consider when you are actually setting your objectives. Your objectives must now also be communicated, monitored, and updated as required, and these are all additional requirements to those that were in 18,001. You should remember that your objectives should be proportionate to the scale, complexity, and nature of your business, and of course, to your risks and opportunities. Plans to achieve your safety objectives is the new terminology replacing management programs in 18,001. So in simple terms, you now need to put an action plan together which determines what you are going to do to meet your objectives, the resources that you need to do it, how you are going to evaluate the results, including the establishment of indicators for monitoring progress, and how the planned actions will be integrated into your business processes. There are also a couple of other important points to note on objectives. It is the responsibility of top management to ensure that objectives have been established and to ensure that they are compatible with the strategic direction of the business. So that requirement comes under the leadership clause 5 and is quite explicit in its requirement that top management must establish the safety objectives. The planning clause 6, which includes hazard identification, assessment of risk and opportunity, legal and other requirements, and your safety objectives, now replaces the preventive action requirement of 18,001. So this clause 6 is, introduces this risk-based methodology approach in the new high-level structure. And this is designed to act as preventive action if it's done correctly. And as such, the terminology of preventive action is now no longer used at all in the standard. The next key change I want to highlight is the difference in the awareness requirements. So awareness comes into the support, clause 7, and 18,001 specified a range of requirements that workers should be made aware of, and ISO 45001 has expanded now on these requirements. So I've just listed these new requirements here. So workers must now also be made aware of the safety policy, your safety objectives, any incidents and the outcome of investigations where they are relevant to your workers, and your hazards, risks and planned actions, also where it's relevant to them, and the arrangements that you have in place for providing workers with the ability to remove themselves from any dangerous situations and for protecting them from any undue consequence for doing so. So these are all in addition to the implications and consequences of not conforming to safety requirements and the benefits of improved safety performance, which were in 18,001. So those requirements are still there, but the requirements listed there on the slide are all additional awareness requirements. So you need to ensure that your business has processes in place to meet all of these additional requirements. I'm now going to quickly look at the operational control requirements, which is now covered under clause 8 of this new standard. The principles of operational control are the same as it was in 18,001. Operational control is all about you managing and controlling the actions that you've identified to address your risks and opportunities and to achieve your objectives. In other words, operational control is all around how you control the implementation of the planned actions that you will have identified under clause 6 of the standard, which is the planning clause that we've just looked at. Operational control, as you know, comes in many forms and includes things like signage, physical controls or technological controls, competent personnel, your maintenance and inspection programs, safe systems of work, defined processes, all those types of things. So these principles of operational control remain the same as they did in 18,001, but there has been some changes that I thought would be just useful to highlight. So firstly, there is a new and increased emphasis on the effective management of change. So management of change has now been split out into its own clause in the standard, and there is a requirement to now have effective processes in place to manage any change which can impact on safety performance. Businesses are now required to plan for change and ensure that sufficient resources are available to make sure that changes do not introduce new and unforeseen hazards or increase any safety risk within the business. There's also a requirement to now consider opportunities for improvements through the management of change process. So the important thing to consider when reviewing your processes for managing change is that it's likely that any significant change in the business will involve the top management, And it's important that they understand and consider safety, risk and opportunity prior to making any change decisions. And as we know, this could prove quite challenging for many businesses. The control of outsourced processes is now also explicitly referenced in the standard. You cannot now exclude any such processes from the scope of your management system. So you must still retain responsibility for any risks arising from outsourced activity and ensure that you have appropriate controls in place for managing your outsourced processes. So just to clarify what we mean by an outsourced process, it's one that is integral to the functioning of your business and which is performed on a product or activity that sits within the scope of your management system, but which is perceived by your interested parties as being carried out by you. So examples of outsourced processes might be internal auditing or your legal compliance audits or welding, galvanizing, packing, spray painting, chrome plating, all those types of things that you might, or sometimes businesses, outsource to an external provider. So it's these types of processes that you must now still manage within your safety management system. The type and extent of control that you apply to such outsourced processes should be proportionate to the safety risk that that activity might present. So you need to put in place appropriate controls, both to make sure that the external provider understands what is needed and to assure that the business that it's being carried out in an acceptable way. The last point I want just to highlight around operational control is around the selection and control of contractors. The requirements are now much more prescriptive than they were in 18001, and through your procurement process, you now need to assess the risks to the business arising from their contractor activities. You need to assess how your activities can impact on contractors' workers, and assess contractors' activities that can impact on any other interested parties in the workplace. So the extent of management of contractors can vary depending on the nature and extent of the services that they provide for your business and the associated hazards and risks arising from their activities. You need to decide what is necessary for your business. The next area I'm just going to quickly look at is performance evaluation. So performance evaluation is the new clause 9 in the standard and covers many of the areas that were previously covered under clauses 4.5 and 4.6 of 18001. I'm just going to highlight a couple of changes that I think are relevant to highlight for you. The first is evaluation of compliance. So you now have there's now much more emphasis on you being able to demonstrate your knowledge and understanding of your compliance status against all of your legal and other requirements, and for you to take timely action to address any compliance gaps that you have. So it's very important that you carry out your evaluation of compliance correctly and you record your findings into your legal register to demonstrate that this is all being done. And remember that you can contact us if you need help with this. It's also important to note that trends in fulfilment of compliance obligations is now a required input to the management review process. So you need to make sure that you have this information and data. The next area of performance evaluation is around internal audit, and there are just a couple of minor points to note here, which are your audit results, where relevant, must now be reported to your workers and to any other interested parties. And a review of trends in your audit results is now, again, a required input to the management review process. And this brings me nicely now on to the last part of performance evaluation, which is management review. So there have been some significant changes now in management review around what needs to be considered at the management review, including the adequacy of resources for your safety management system and the extent to which your safety policy commitments are being met. And you must now also review changes in your issues, the needs and expectations of your interested parties, your risks and opportunities, and your legal and other requirements. So as you can see, a lot of the new requirements that I've gone through in the standard now feed through to the management review process and must be considered as inputs now into that. And at management review, there's a significant emphasis now on trend analysis. So you need to review trends in your incidents, non-conformities and corrective actions, results of any monitoring and measurement, your audit results, your compliance obligations, consultation and participation of workers, and risks and opportunities. So the challenge here is to make sure that you have processes in place to capture the relevant data to allow you to do the trend analysis at management review. There are also some changes to the outputs of management review, which include decisions relating to the continuing suitability and effectiveness of your management system, opportunities for continual improvement, opportunities to improve integration of your management system. So we see integration here being mentioned again, implications for the strategic direction of the business, and communication of relevant outputs of management review to your workers. The final change I wanted to draw your attention to is the improvement clause of the standard, clause 10. So this clause now covers incidents, non-conformities, corrective action, and continual improvement. I'm just going to highlight a couple of minor changes. So incident investigation is now no longer a clause in its own right. It's been combined and wrapped up with non-conformity and corrective action. And as I pointed out earlier, there is now no longer any reference to preventive action, as this has now been replaced by the risk-based methodology of clause 6. So there is now no longer corrective preventive action, it's non-conformity and corrective action only. The root cause of incidents and non-conformity should now be evaluated with the participation of workers and the involvement of any other relevant interested parties. Your action to address non-conformities and incidents must now be done in accordance with the hierarchy of control, which is obviously elimination, substitution, engineering controls, etc. And you must now review assessment of your safety risks and other risks after an incident of or a non-conformity has occurred. So in other words, there now needs to be a closed loop process back to the clause 6 planning, so that when something goes wrong, you are reconsidering risk and opportunity to the business. And last but not least, you must now react to and address incidents and non-conformities in a timely manner. So it's been recognised that businesses are often good at identifying non-conformities, but they're not particularly good at closing them out in a timely fashion. So there's much more emphasis now on the timely closure of non-conformities, and it is something that your auditors could pay close attention to. So that concludes the webinar for this morning. Thank you very much for listening. We will be staying online for around 15 minutes to answer any more questions that you might have. There will be a link to a recording of the webinar and slides, which will be emailed to you, along with an anonymous copy of all the Q&As. We will be sending out a feedback survey, which I'd be very grateful if you could complete. If you do need any support with your migration to ISO 45001 or any other management systems or legal compliance support, you can contact us on the number or email us. We do also have some one-day 45001 migration training courses running earlier in the new year. The dates there in January for Birmingham and London and Manchester in February. You can book on these through the link on the homepage of the Legislation Update Service, or you can call us or email us. The prices there are £480 for LUS subscribers and £600 for non-LUS subscribers. And this one-day course will take you through all these new changes and new requirements of the standard in much more detail. Thank you very much for listening today, and I hope to see you at one of our webinars in the future. Thank you very much.